Greetings. My name is Michael Miller. This is a Michael Miller trademark training video out to you because you're watching. Thank you and welcome. It's meant for Michael Miller Pilates licensed affiliates, the Core New Core, and anyone interested in surviving and thriving as a Pilates instructor or student. Mostly, though, trying to survive as a Pilates instructor. That's what has been a consistent point of focus, and it comes from me, not by me. Four things today, and it has a lot to do with an interaction on Facebook I had over the weekend where I shared, meaning I took somebody else's video of the roll-up and I shared it. And I shared it because it was a really good roll-up, okay? From shoulders to hips. And there was definitely an end point of tension at the heels, to the point, though, of being, to me, way locked in the knees, that you could tell because the heels were in the air. You follow that? So if your heels are in the air on the roll-up, you're out of range, and the way you want to be able to do it is by keeping your heels on the ground as you roll up. But there was a good endpoint. And so here I have a trusty tape measure, right? And it works really well to say, here's the body come rolling up, and then here it is rolling back down. Well, at least that's the way Joe talks about it. And so my number one title is Go Back to Joe. And, you know, this guy and his book, Return to Life Through Contrology, and his instructions on the roll-up. And I made note that he goes from flat on your back with your feet pointed and your toes down. What does he say? He says, stretch toes pointed forward and downward, right? Which in 2B, he says, toes pointed upward. So that's different, right? Toes pointed downward, the toes pointed upward, and there you have an end point of tension at the ankle. Okay? An end point of tension at the ankle. And it's from that, an engagement at the hips, that allows you to roll up. So in any discussion, the point best made and first made is always there is the source. And it's not much, and in that sense it is all the more precious and to be considered all the more significant. Now I say that, and you that know me know I talk about unlocking your knees and creating an endpoint of tension at the metatarsals. Because in this video I shared that had such a good roll up, it goes into vertical with a spine, and then toes point down, and there's this thing rolling down. So by virtue of the fact that it doesn't just roll up and then roll back down, there's nothing in Joe's instructions that talks about pointing the feet again or coming to vertical before reversing the reach. So here I am saying that in MMP, which is just one view out of thousands, taking Joe at his words and his instructions, the roll-up is about this. There is no coming to vertical and then doing this. That's a different exercise that comes later. So it's either as wanting to survive as an instructor, it helps me to recognize the alteration from Joe's original work, and then helps me clarify the difference between whatever I see and whatever you know about of Joe's original work, or whatever I know about in this case. So in this roll up, when you see the pointed foot, it's straight out of Joe's book, and yet it isn't, because the toes pointed up is a press out the heels or a rotation in the opposite direction at the end point of the ankles. Okay, the end point is the end of the axis of rotation. So looking at it from this point of view, excuse me, so there's an axis of rotation there. And toes pointed downward is one direction of rotation, and toes pointed upward is another. And so you, listening to me, are learning about MMP, which is this point of view of Pilates that includes self-identified, discovered, I was going to say, if you will, because in identifying it, no one else has, and in that regard, discovered. Be that as it may, no matter who gives you the puzzle, and no matter who shows you how to do the puzzle, what matters is you understand how to do the puzzle. So in the roll-up, the body moves beautifully in this example of roll-up I'm talking about. It's not that there's not capacity there. It's an unawareness of core new tension. It's unawareness of an expression of roll-up that is more pure, if you wish, or simpler, or right out of the book roll-up. So it may be out of the 10,000 views that view is coming from, I can sort of make the roll-up whatever I want. And more power to you and them. But as the instructions go, it's make an end point of tension at the ankles by pressing out your heels. Now, ideally, you don't lock your knees because you don't need to, and it gets in the way of squeezing your inner thighs together. And that whole combination of tension gives you great foundation for making a roll-up. And I haven't even said anything about knowing about core new tension from ears to shoulders, and how that's how you wear your shoulders in the reach. And that when you're up and bent over, you're making core new tension ears to shoulders and shoulders to hips, as well as hips out to ankles, without locking out the knees, because it diminishes the ability to make tension that distributes to your engagement uniformly. In the other instance of roll-up that I didn't share because it's hard to share something that you only can hold up as, you don't want to make a bad impression about what, I don't want to make a bad impression about what I'm sharing. And so in Facebook, you could go down through my stream and see the roll-up that I shared and observe the articulation of the foot and toes and see the expression of vertical and on into rolling down. And so right away, of the three things, right, that third thing of the mat, Joe's mat, is knowing Joe's mat. Now, I'm not saying memorize, I'm not saying memorize his book. But I am saying have it in hand and be able to read his instructions. And then when you go looking for clarification beyond what you have access to of archival information, it's relevant to understanding what it is. Then look to MMP as a point of view that at least tries to distinguish the pieces and how they fit together. That's as an instructor, knowing why you teach and what you're teaching and how to teach it and la la. All right, so in this other example of roll-up that I didn't share was a performer who made a roll-up insofar as it stayed pretty even in plane, in body, and yet the roll-up was accomplished through the throwing of your own mass to make it happen. And in such a case, it's hard to imagine that the core has any hope of successful engagement in that effort. Now, maybe some, yes, but based on what you see as an instructor, I had a guy sit down on the Cadillac with his hands on the roll-down bar, which means it was attached to some springs. But I said, okay, now roll down and roll back. And my jaw dropped when he went boom, 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 and looked for me to see how many of these I wanted him to do. And it was a shotgun effort. It was the throwing of the mass of the body, without any articulation to the type of engagement that throws it around. Just accomplishing it was all that mattered. So my note is that it's not that you get there, it's how you get there. And the way you get there, of course, is through working uniformly, or whole body, right? We're on page with that. It's a whole body thing. That's why the core is the key. Notice I didn't say the core is key, which is true too, but also core is the key. And what is a key? Well, it's something that you turn, right, to unlock what you're after, which I think is pretty apropos because the hips have an ability to, and then a capacity to, make rotational dynamic, as do the shoulders and around the ears, the knees, the ankles, and the metatarsals. This is what I claim of identifying within the human body are these endpoints of tension that play off of each other, and in so doing create core new tension. And is it not only rotational dynamic, Not only is it round, but it's a grip that goes in. Involution. Not evolution, with what it all comes out of it, but in our attempt to seize control and express control of ourselves, it's an involutionary effort. It's creating a grip. It's condensing into a grip toward it that defines the axis you're condensing towards. That sounds way silly or way too abstract. Rotation is the key. See, rotation is the key. The core is the key. It's rotation that is the key, and rotation that manifests itself in the characteristic of a grip. And so now we get into the roll-up being one of momentum and throwing mass, or throwing your weight around. As an instructor, what's something you could do to slow down the throwing of the weight by changing the weight in the exercise? Well, that's two good questions right there. Two answers I think of. One, of course, anchor the ankles. Most Pilates studios have special pads with a strap you put your ankles under so that you can work on the engagement and not be overwhelmed at the weight you've got going on here for the lack of connection you have down here. The other would be an iron bar. Put an iron bar or something heavier in the person's arms in the position where they're trying to work that slow reach, that slow roll up. So I sent a message that said, legs together, because the legs were shoulder width apart, and put a yoga block between your thighs. Push out through your heels, knees stay soft. Curl around your ears to lift your head. Stop. Open your mouth, which means open the airway, right? Now, squeeze your legs together and push out through your heels to cause your exhale. And whatever you have brings you up as far as you can, and then you come back down if you don't get all the way up. Because what matters more, and that's why the core is key, what matters more is that you maintain the grip at the hip. You maintain the integrity of the pelvis in space. You can talk about neutral spine and all of that positional stuff. This is a point of view that's considering the physics that is involved when you create rotation, and that if you lose that grip, like in your hundreds, if your legs are too heavy and you can't hold your legs up, so it causes you to arch in your lower back, which means compress your vertebrae and fall out of a neutral spine, which means falling out of the capacity to be uniformly engaged. See, it's not just the position of the spine that matters. It matters the muscular engagement of the body, that the position of the spine either reinforces or is overwhelmed by. So too much weight, you can't keep your back from arching. What's the solution to that as a Pilates instructor? I said too much weight, right? So less weight. Closer to center. How much? Well, how do you know when? Well, that all is the art of being a Pilates instructor and taking your student into the cave of their own awareness, diving into the ocean of their own concentration. But the key thing is that there's a distinguishment, a sensation, a distinguishment in sensation. And that's what you're teaching a person. And the first thing to teach a person is whether or not they lose their grip at the hips, whether or not they lose their core. If this were a grip and I was Indian wrestling and my wrist was way bent like that, there's no strength in my hand here in that grip because my wrist is broken. I mean, not literally, but bent. So bent that it has no strength in it. Our muscularity, our whole humanity as a being, as a structure, in my opinion, as I see it, is a being that's evolved over a long time. And yet has this elaborate ability, capacity of engaging itself to escape the dinosaur, which is, in our case, mostly gravity. And so, as Yoda, we're telling our client in to sense the difference between a good grip at the hips versus a bad one, and how to use your weight, say of your legs in hundreds, to challenge and develop and take your grip deeper without losing your ability to hold your position in space, like to hold neutral spine and to be engaged uniformly in that effort. So, right? I've said for a long time that embodiment is the ultimate authority. And I think that became a thing because, as an instructor, when I see someone that dives into their effort, right, and they express complete coordination in their being, thinking, and observing. I mean, I'm saying that's a state of being in the body in the moment of the doing, and it's not like that's not obvious to someone attuned to recognizing it. Now, it may be slipping through, and there may be just body and mind there, but usually observing has to be part of it for that corrective loop to be happening, right? And insofar as that being the case, I'm saying that it's obvious when you see it. Oh, and that's why it comes out of my mouth as a feedback to the student that embodiment is the ultimate authority. Just like on a much smaller basis, well, and yet it is the same thing. There are times when I see a person disappear into their cave and are just way coordinated in their being, thinking, and observing, and that could be a beginner on just a small little thing, and they have no idea what Pilates is, and it's this huge mystical mountain that they only feel privileged and just being on the threshold of it, right? But when you actually identify to a person with the words, that's Pilates, it's up to you whether you share like that. But to me, it's like that just is a reflection of and an acknowledgement of what you see in them. And then Katie bar the door, if they recognize that it's this experience that they just came back out of, and I can't wait to go back into, in search of. And the other thing about embodiment as the ultimate authority is that it's not about how much you know that makes you an authority. In my opinion, about being a Pilates instructor, and to me that's the only thing that matters. Anybody from some other realm that wants to exert an opinion about Pilates from their realm is doing just that. When you come from a point of view that there's an ideal within Pilates, then it is about Pilates that is the search for distinction, and therefore have more control of what that means to you. I think people that are comfortable in their intellect and uncomfortable in being connected to observing are great candidates for Pilates, for an instructor that's aware of the capacities within the human being, what you're trying to coordinate, how you're trying to coordinate them, and then when you recognize the experience, giving them the recognition that where they were just at was what it's all about, according to MMP. In leg circles, which is I think today in terms of how many days into March or whatever, all of these pointed feet that you see is, from this point of view, a dancer influence that will be grown out of when people actually feel the difference with an awareness of core new tension, and that in the interest of developing the body uniformly, we'll have an endpoint of tension at the metatarsals with a soft knee as they're doing their leg circles. And the leg that's down is an endpoint of tension at the ankle, meaning pressing out through the heel, without locking the knee, because locked joints cut down on uniform engagement, the potential for uniform engagement. My opinion. And see, we end up talking about tension. It's about tension. Because through tension, miracles happen. Like the symphony of tension in the human musculature that has evolved with the ability to engage itself most efficiently, to carry the load of its body as lightly as possible. And I know this is just me and Michael Miller, this point of view, but really, to develop the body uniformly, if you're really serious about uniformly, if you're really serious at it being a whole body exercise, then you owe it to yourself to know about core new tension and find it as a sensation in your own body so that you have sensational feedback to what you already know. And you can only know what you know for as long as you know it, because life can't live forever. Read between the lines and see behind the curtain. Evaluate points of view. Like, know what you know and know where you're coming from, and recognize the rest of the world, and at least enjoy, for me, the clarity of this point of view, because it's ideal. Add to and to, direct your thinking, Geist,